So this is the Muslim dilemma. You've heard me talk about different things about the Quran and things like that. And so now it's been given this kind of official name. And there's actually quite a few videos about it now. And like I said, I've talked about it before, but not with that term. But it's impossible for a Muslim to answer this question because it's like a logical fallacy. It's like it just doesn't work. It always comes back to the Quran not being inspired. So here's the dilemma. In the Quran, it says Allah's words cannot be corrupted or changed. Allah has 4 books in heaven that were eternal. They've always been there. And he delivered them down to prophets. Those books include the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, and, of course, the Quran. So they're all incorruptible because they're Allah's word. Well, anyone reading the New Testament, if we had 10 atheists and said, we want you to read this, and the question is, do these texts talk about Jesus being crucified and rising from the dead? Not whether they believe in it or not, just whether that happened. They would reason them and say, of course, it's in every one of these Gospels. Paul talks about it, blah, 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 and that's true. There it is. So the Gospel says Jesus Christ was crucified. Now, the Quran says Jesus was not crucified. Problem. And the Quran, like I said that these other 3 books could not be corrupted or altered. Sometimes they'll just quickly say, oh, your scriptures, the Jewish and Christian scriptures are corrupt. It's like, oh no, the Quran says they're not corrupt. And they'll say something, oh no, but you don't have the same versions you had, when he wrote it. Well, he wrote, Muhammad supposedly got his revelations from the angel Gabriel in that 620 AD mark. Well, by that time, the canon of Scripture was solid. There had been, I think the church council that came out and declared that was 100, 200 years earlier. And why did they declare it? Because all the churches were using the same books, but there were people who wanted to add books in. And you've heard of these things like the Gospel of St. Thomas, all these other ones. Some of those are later, but some, they wanted to interject books, and the church says, no, those aren't revealed books. This is the canon. Well, so if the Quran verified the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospel in the year 620, he's verifying what we have now. There's just no way out around it. That's true, and he even says that, Christians and Jews are people of the book. Our book is, the Gospel, but I think when Muhammad, the Bible, the Quran says couldn't read or write. So I think he kind of assumed that his stuff would intermesh with the Jewish writings and the Christian writings, but they don't. You get in this loop where you have to say, the Quran is true. It talks about the Gospels being true. The Gospels say something different than the Quran does, so the Quran is untrue. Or maybe you could say, well, the Bible and the Quran are both untrue. But there's no way to get at the Quran not being in error or corrupted because of this issue about the crucifixion. Now that's the popular one they're using, but you can get many other elements of the scripture from the Old Testament and New Testament and look at the Quran and say, the Quran is different here. And then they run into the same argument. They say, oh no, they used to say, oh, you gotta read it in Arabic. Well, they're not doing that as much now because we have so many people that know, can, translate ancient Arabic, which isn't even how it's written today. The Quran has all these additions to it because in the original you didn't have the vowels and things. Well, they've been put in, but, they're put in. It is the original. If it's supposed to be exactly the same, it's not supposed to have one letter that's even different because Allah wrote it, it's perfect, and it existed for all time. So what do you do? There's just no way out around that because of this logical fallacy. And then someone will say, oh, no. Those, and still insist that those aren't the things you have in the Bible aren't the original. And it's like, oh, show us some proof. If Islam wasn't invented in 620 by this guy Muslim, this guy Muhammad, whether he existed or not, some people put it, the real development of Islam like 200 years later. But if what they're saying is true, where are their copies? Don't they have even a fragment of these three, these three important books that they, if they say we got the wrong version, they don't have anything. Again, so they just get in this argument and they keep hitting a wall in that the Quran says that the Old Testament, New Testament are written by Allah and they are correct. The Bible does not agree with the Quran. So the Quran is false. And, people come, and you can watch other people. I don't know if most will watch this or not, but you can see some of their arguments and they just hit a brick wall because there's no way out around that. And this idea of, you got to read it in Arabic, or it's got to be written, you got to be able to read Arabic, ancient Arabic, or you need to speak it, or this or that. That type of argument has gone long ago because we have so many scholars who can read it directly and say, yeah, this is what it says. So there you go. If you're a Muslim, you have a dilemma. Explain to me, was the Quran true when it said that Allah wrote the other three books? And was it true when it said that Allah's word could not be corrupted? Because if those two statements are true, the Quran is false. And because there's not the agreement there. So there's either more things wrong in the Quran, or one thing's wrong in the Quran, or all things are wrong in the Quran. It's just not, it just is an illogical argument that they can't get out of. But please, if you have a solution, let me see it. And we're talking here, we're not talking matters of faith, matter of belief. We're talking about what the text actually says. The gospel is clear that Jesus Christ was crucified. The Quran is clear that he was not. The Quran even goes to the extent of, or scholars say, that, well, Allah made it appear to be Jesus, but it really wasn't. Like maybe it was, Judas. But Judas went out and hung himself. How could he get on the cross later? They attempt to interject some things about, it appeared that Jesus was crucified. And it's like, no, that's just fanciful ridiculousness. Because why would Allah intentionally deceive people? See, then you got a problem if you think, some of the Quran says that Allah is the best deceiver. Now, some people will say, oh, no, it doesn't really say that. It says he can trick people, or he can get out, he's wise, and he can get out around what other people are trying to say that isn't true. Like he can trip up people who are being deceivers. But I don't know. That's neither here nor there. We just have hardcore facts, factual sentences in the gospel, in the Psalms, in the Torah, that don't agree with the Quran, and the Quran does state some specific historic facts, and they don't agree with the gospel. So the Quran is wrong, or they can all be wrong. Yeah, that's one of the things you can draw. But if we're just doing a contextual criticism, it appears that the Quran has major errors in it, because it just doesn't agree with the books it says it agrees with. It'd be kind of like you're watching a two-part movie and you go to the second part and the characters are all wrong and they're doing different things, and it's like you're saying, wait a second, this doesn't go with the last thing I read. So there you go, the dilemma. If the Quran is true about saying the gospel is true, then the Quran is wrong, because it doesn't agree with the Gospels. Bye.